Hey team, and welcome back to another video in our Astrological Magical Elections video series. Today we're going to talk about the magical elections that are going to be available to us between this Capricorn Full Moon and the Cancer New Moon. So we actually do have a good number of elections to talk about today. I always get a little nervous when it comes to waning moon phases, where we typically have kind of less constructive energy, we'll say, to work with, and then just knowing that, of course, Saturn and Jupiter are retrograde, and all the mess that usually comes along with that. So while we do have a good number of elections to talk about today, we have kind of a weird situation again where the electional opportunities between the three different locations that I survey are all pretty much the same. So we're going to do it a little bit more old school style, where instead of focusing on each specific location and then going through the elections in them, we're going to talk about each election specifically, talk about the electional or the locational variants, and then dive more into what the talisman is for. So our first electional opportunity is going to be for a first Lunar Mansion talisman, and in North America, this first Lunar Mansion talisman is going to be on July 1st at around 7 in the morning. And here we're going to have the moon in the first Lunar Mansion conjoin the midheaven, while at the same time she's applying the square to the sun. The moon rules the first house, and that's kind of it, like a pretty cut and dry, kind of an easy kind of thing going on here. For Western Europe, it's pretty much the same thing. Here, it's going to be on July 1st at around 7:15. We're going to have the moon in the first Lunar Mansion conjoin the midheaven. That's a very big circle that I drew for some reason. But here, the moon is going to apply instead the trine to Venus in the first house, with the moon, again, maintaining the rulership of the first house. The moon's unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. She's not combust the sun, anything like that. So just kind of a safe, another just basically the same election, just a little bit different degree rising, and the moon is now applying to Venus instead of the sun. And then the Australian continent, their first Lunar Mansion talisman is going to be on July 2nd at around 6 in the morning. 6:08 is what this is set for. And this one looks a bit different from the other ones, primarily because our ascendant sign is different. But here the moon is still in the first Lunar Mansion, could join the midheaven, that's the same. And she's applying the square to the sun like she was in the North American continent. But now we have this this Mercury as the ruler of the first house. Mercury strong in Gemini, unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. The ascendant unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. So here we kind of have like a little bit different flavor. But through all the three locations, the chart kind of maintains similarities and some differences to make them unique. But the first Lunar Mansion is one that is primarily more focused for like waxing moon energies. It's usually more of a waxing moon talisman, because in the waxing moon we make the first Lunar Mansion to kind of like ignite ourselves, to get us moving forward with a thing, to help overcome roadblocks and procrastinations and things like that, to help a lot of fire under us, to get us going and to get us motivated. It's our say yes to the thing, get the thing done kind of talisman. For waning moons, I like to use the first Lunar Mansion to kind of prune back on things that we have committed to, things that we may have overcommitted to, and to kind of get back and bring back some of that energy to be a little bit more internal. This one, so here now, it's kind of the flip side of it, to where if you go too far with first Lunar Mansion stuff, you end up just saying yes to everything, and your plate becomes really full, you feel overwhelmed and burned out kind of thing, and that obviously is bad. And just like the overheating kind of aspect of it. But when we take this talisman and we do it more with like a waning phase, here we're trying to cut back and we're trying to start saying no to things, or I'm sorry, I can't do this. And it's more about recollecting that energy that we may have been putting out there for too long, to better be able to put quality work into the things that we really ought to or should or want to do, more than the things that we feel like we have to do or like we're obligated to do. So the first Lunar Mansion for this is very useful for those feelings of being burnt out, and kind of like more focused on the internal recovery from this, massively gotta do the stuff kind of mindset that we get into. We always have to be productive, we think. But the first Lunar Mansion in a waning moon phase helps us to remember, we don't, like literally nobody cares if we're productive or not. And it helps us refocus on what's more important, ourselves, our own energy reserves. So definitely recommend this talisman if you've been having those feelings of being burnt out. And then, of course, just take a goddamn vacation is another really good solution to that, too. So our second election is actually going to be for a couple days later. For North American continent, this is going to be on July 4th at around 2:30 in the morning, and it's going to be an opportunity for a fourth Lunar Mansion talisman. So what we're looking for here with this election is the moon on the ascendant, here and applying the squares of Saturn or of Mars, yeah, of Saturn and Mars, after she's separated from the trine of Venus, of course. So what you want to do is you want to catch this election after the Venus trine is separated. For the Western European continent, it's a similar story, except now all the action is kind of happening on the midheaven. So here we've got the moon in the fourth lunar mansion here. She's applying the square with Saturn, and then the square with Mars right afterwards. And we want to make sure she's separated from this trine of Venus. We have Leo on the ascendant with Mars and Saturn, conjoined and opposed it. And we have the Sun, who's in the 11th house. Unfortunately, we weren't able to really get the Sun as debilitated as we would have liked for this one. But hopefully the Mars and Saturn action happening across the ascendant will be enough to give this one some punch. So it's actually the Australian version of this chart that is the best one, in that we have the moon in the fourth lunar mansion on the ascendant while she is actually besieged by the malefic, so she's caught between the square of Saturn, which she's recently separating from, and applying to the square of Mars, which she's applying to right now. The ruler of the first house, Venus, is also kind of conjoined this Mars here and opposed this Saturn, so getting a lot of bang out of that. So I know that we're looking at this as sort of like the anti-election, right? Like, this is a dumpster fire of an election. And what we're doing here is the fourth lunar mansion is a mansion that is primarily utilized for pest control. The Picatrix talks about it specifically within the context of like poisonous animals and reptiles, but we can use that for kind of anything. And you don't actually have to make charts like this or like talismans for pest control for fourth lunar mansion talismans. Anytime the moon and the ascendant ruler are really afflicted, can function as a pest control talisman to some extent. So talking about it like that, that's why, like, when we lean more heavily into these charts or these elections that are more difficult, that are more affliction oriented, we're typically looking more for like pest control, or kind of like warding, or warding something off is more what we're leaning into with this. What exactly you're warding off is kind of up to you. Traditionally, the ascendant sign dictates a lot of the power, or like the target of who it is, or like what we're going for. So for instance, like the sign Scorpio will be used on the ascendant for talismans that are for, like scorpions or bugs or, poisonous insects, or insects that sting, that kind of thing. Like, there's a similarity there under this sort of like archetypal celestial scorpion, right? Whereas the sign Capricorn is more utilized for like mammalian pests, so like rats, mice, gophers, that kind of thing. There's kind of like a really famous talisman for like the Rat Begone talisman, which is featured on Renaissance Astrology, which I believe has a Capricorn ascendant for that talisman. And then like the other signs can be utilized as well, depending on what they are. So like for the Australian version of the chart here, and for the North American version of the chart, which feature Taurus rising, so that one is a little bit like usable, but probably less likely to be used this way, I guess, or less of a problem, in that we're kind of leaning more heavily into the image of like the bull. So like, if you have, like if livestock are a pest for you, or if, I would think of it more like something that people might actually experience would be like deer. Like wild deer eating parts of their garden, like this might be a talisman to ward, like to keep them away. And here we're kind of leaning into not only like the four-footed and hooved, deers and bulls kind of have that in common, but also like the horned aspect of it. So that would be kind of the way that would work. And then you can kind of play that with other signs, like the Western European version of this chart has Leo rising, so like wild animals, bobcats, coyotes, that kind of thing might be something more that this would ward off. Or, if you want to play with it, Leos, maybe a Leo is a pest, or like a Taurus is a pest because of those signs rising. So, play with it and have fun. Or maybe that thing you want to ward off is another cat trying to get into your cat bed after you are clearly very comfortable in it by yourself. But she's going to keep on licking and then eventually wiggle her way into there. See? I could have had a talisman. So our third and our final election that we're going to talk about today is actually going to be for a Mercury planetary talisman. And this one was a little bit of a surprise. I didn't expect to find this one. I was surprised to not have it written down. And Mercury talismans are actually kind of rare. So first we're going to talk about the elections for the 3 locations, and then we're going to talk about a little bit why Mercury talismans are so rare to find, and why everybody should definitely capitalize on this one while we have the opportunity, because our next really good one is going to be like in August of 2022, so we're going to have about a year gap between them, which isn't really so bad, but they're worth taking advantage of now while we can. So for the North American continent, this Mercury talisman is going to happen on July 7th at around noon. This Saturday is set for 11:46. And just kind of very simply, it's a Wednesday, so we have Mercury's day. The moon is applying the conjunction with Mercury. Mercury's angular on the midheaven, and Mercury is unafflicted. Mercury's angular, and the ruler of the first house is also Mercury, so I don't have to worry about anybody else. So just like kind of hits all of our 4 points. Mercury needs to be in a sign it does well in. It's in Gemini. Mercury needs to be angular. It's in the midheaven. The moon needs to be applying to Mercury. It's happening. And then it needs to be Mercury's day and hour, which is great, which is also true. And then Mercury has to not be afflicted in any serious way. Mercury, the chart in general, just need not be afflicted in any serious way. The only thing that might be more of like a meh is the kind of proximity of the moon to the node here. It's about 9 degrees and separating, so probably not as big of an influence, but something to consider if you're going to move forward with this. That's like the one kind of iffy thing. The Western European version of this chart I think is a little bit better. Here we've got the moon and Mercury conjoined on the ascendant, both angular of course, during Mercury's day and Mercury's hour, and unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. The ruler of the first house is Mercury still, so we don't have to worry about anybody else. So again, hitting all of our 4 points there. Mercury needs to be in a sign it does well in. Gemini needs to be angular in the ascendant. Moon needs to be applying to it, which is happening, and it's both Mercury's day and hour, and there's no kind of malefic stuff going on with the chart as well. So again, another really solid Mercury planetary election. Then our final one looks very, very similar to the Western European version, the Australian version. This one is July 8th at around 6 in the morning. 6:04 is what this chart is set for. Same thing. Mercury and the moon are conjoined on the ascendant. It's Mercury's day. Mercury's in Gemini. And there's no maleficness happening here. We still kind of have the node issue in both the Western European and the Australian one, but the moon is separated more. So in the North American version, it was separated by 9 degrees. Here, it's separated by 11 degrees. And then in the Western European version, it was separated by like 13, 14 degrees. So kind of the further we go, the further they get, which makes it easier to work with. So really, it's more just like the North American continent that's going to have to ask that question of, is this worth having this kind of this proximity with the lunar node involved? And I think yes. I don't think it's that big of a deal. But other people might not feel that way, and that's totally fine. So why are Mercury talismans themselves so rare? Well, it has a lot to do with just like unique astronomical experiences that the planet Mercury undergoes. One, Mercury is retrograde several times a year for a grand total of about 10 weeks. So 10 weeks of the year, then Mercury is completely off the table. And that's not even really counting the times where Mercury is more slow, which we like moving slow throughout the sky, which, while not like a huge red X over it, is kind of more non-ideal. So we would tend to not really want that. Mercury here is moving very quickly, so it's better. And the retrograde period with Mercury is actually pretty lenient in some respects compared to the other planets like Jupiter and Saturn, which tend to be retrograde or slow for like 4 months out of the year. So the time there is a little bit more comparable, but kind of more spread out with the Mercury elections or with Mercury's motion than Jupiter and Saturn, which just have like these huge chunks of the calendar just off the table. Mercury tends to be in smaller chunks, but it happens more sporadically. The second thing that makes Mercury talismans very difficult is that Mercury has like a certain specific relationship with the Sun, and Venus has this too, but has a bit of a wider leash, we'll say, to where Mercury can only be about 28 degrees from the Sun at any given time. So, unlike the other planets, which can have sort of any sort of relationship with the Sun, Mercury and Venus have to be very close. For Venus, it's like 47 degrees. They have to be, they have like a certain reach that they have to maintain. And so their relationship is a bit more complicated because not only does Mercury have to stay within 28 degrees of the Sun, but there's a 15-degree segment of that, 7.5 degrees on either side of the Sun, where Mercury is combust. And combustion is a serious affliction to planets. So we're not going to make talismans while Mercury is combust. So that's 15 degrees out of a potential of, what's 28 plus 28? So that's 15 degrees out of a total of like 56 degrees that Mercury can occupy, 28 on one side and 28 on the other side of the Sun. that are no-go zones. But then we have an additional 15 degrees with relationship with the sun where we're said to be within the beams, which isn't quite as serious as combustion, but still isn't that great. So we would tend to kind of treat this more like Mercury going slowly, to where Mercury being under the beams of the sun within 7.5 degrees to 15 degrees away from the sun might not be necessarily a deal breaker for a Mercury planetary talisman, but it also isn't something that you would like write home about. Like, it's not that great of an opportunity. So out of the 56 available degrees that Mercury can occupy at any time because of its relationship with the sun, there's a good 30 that are off the table at any given time. The 15 degree reach on either side of being under the beams, or you might just say, if you wanted to have an easier time and just go ahead and accept Mercury being under the beams as a thing that might have to be the compromise, then you only have to worry about the 15 degrees. But even then, going from 56 potential degrees to 26 really narrows down potential election charts. So there's that. And there's the retrograde you have to worry about. And then you just have to get Mercury and the moon to connect in one of Mercury's signs, which is itself more complicated than it sounds. Because while the other planets have 3 signs of really strong dignity that they can occupy, they have 2 domiciles and exaltation, Mercury doesn't. So I guess in this way, Mercury is a little bit more similar to like the sun and the moon. So when you're making Jupiter talismans, you have 3 opportunities for like really excellent, perfect dignity, where Jupiter can be either in signs of domiciles, Pisces or Sagittarius, or it can be in Cancer at sign of exaltation. But you don't really have that with Mercury because Mercury shares its domicile and exaltation. They're compacted within the sign of Virgo. So you only have the 2 chances, Mercury in Gemini or Mercury in Virgo, which is why it's a little bit more similar to like the moon, which either can only be like in Cancer or Taurus for those really strong dignities, or the sun in Leo or Aries, because the moon and the sun lack a second sign of domicile. Well, Mercury lacks a differentiation in a sign of domicile and exaltation. So that narrows this down a little bit more. And then there's just Mercury's speed that tends to complicate things a lot. Mercury can move really, really fast. So as an example, the moon will conjoin Mercury in 24 degrees of Gemini on July 8th for Australia, since this is the chart that we're looking at. Kind of moving through time here, Mercury and the moon will not reconjoin again until 24 degrees Leo. So, and that happens on August 9th. So in the span of like 32 days, Mercury has moved 60 degrees. They've completely skipped over the conjunction in Cancer. And, moving 60 degrees in 32 days is a lot. That seems fine. Seems fair. So this is a problem or an issue to worry about, because while it's not a big deal that Mercury and the moon skipped over Cancer, it is a big deal if they skip over Virgo or Gemini, because you're counting on, when you need those aspects with the moon to the planet that you're making the talisman of, which you do, you count on there being at least 7. Like, you count on there at least being 1 conjunction, 2 sextiles, 2 trines, and 2 squares, and an opposition if you want to, like, if you're really desperate, for a lunar contact. But a lot of the times, you're not going to get all 7. You're going to get 6. You're more likely to get 6 than you are to get 7 with Mercury in these signs. So not only do you have to worry about Mercury's retrograde motion, or Mercury's kind of erratic, slowing down and speeding up, you have to worry about Mercury being within a small sliver of its already small band of zodiacal degrees that it can occupy at a given time due to its relationship with the sun. Then you have to worry about it just completely freaking skipping over signs with lunar contacts, which can be a problem if it's sign-sided rules. So, all that to say, Mercury is complicated, and finding good elections for Mercury is even, this is what complicates it. And it tends to be why people take a lot of shortcuts with Mercury talismans and Mercury elections, which, I get, but still. So all that is why I definitely recommend anybody who can taking advantage of the July 8th or July 7th, depending where you are in the world, Mercury election, not only because it's super great and it clicks all the boxes, which is something that we don't always get with Mercury, but we tend to have these really dry spells, like these droughts of good Mercury elections, to work with. And so, we'll have this one, and then we have another coming up in August of 2022. So if you missed this one or you don't feel super comfortable with this one, we do have that one to look forward to next year. But, it's next year. So just keep that in mind with planning, I guess. Alrighty, everyone. Well, those are the 3 electional opportunities for our 3 locations that I had to share with you guys today. The first Lunar Mansion talisman, the 4th Lunar Mansion talisman for pest control, and the Mercury and Gemini planetary talisman. I definitely recommend everybody grabbing that one up if you can, just because it's going to be a while before we get another one, and they're super hard to get. Anyway, so everybody take care, and I will see you guys again on the Cancer New Moon.